Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for more lost gold and treasure legends. Please leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. For future videos, hit the notification bell. Relax and enjoy. In the vast expanse of the American Southwest, where the desert sun bakes ancient mountains and forgotten trails, there are stories that blur the line between fact and fiction. Tales of lost mines, forgotten treasures, and mysterious caves have captivated prospectors and adventurers for generations. But few stories are as intriguing as the one we're about to share, the tale of the Golden Sand Lost Cave. The year was approximately 1905, during the ambitious construction of the Salt Lake Railroad. This iron artery was being forged from Salt Lake City to San Pedro, California, bringing with it dreams of prosperity and connection. Along its growing length, small mining camps sprouted like desert flowers after rain, and prospectors combed the hills with determination and hope. It was during this time of opportunity and exploration that our story truly begins, at the mining camp of Crescent, Nevada. Picture, if you will, the scene that unfolded. A small desert camp centered around a windmill and water trough, where local prospectors gathered to share tales and dreams of striking it rich. Into this setting came an unusual figure, an elderly man with flowing white whiskers, mounted on a burro and leading four others. The sight of a lone prospector wasn't unusual in those days, but there was something different about this particular arrival. After watering his burros at the trough, the stranger made camp on the outskirts. It wasn't long before a group of local characters gathered around his fire. Winfield Sherman, a typical long-haired, bewhiskered desert rat, Ike Reynolds, Bert Kavanaugh, Jim Wilson, and our anonymous witness to these events. The conversation that evening, led primarily by Winfield Sherman, revealed the stranger's identity. He introduced himself as Riley Hatfield, originally from Raleigh, North Carolina. His story seemed ordinary enough at first. He'd come west on his doctor's advice and was making his way to Searchlight, Nevada, seeking both provisions and medical attention for a troubling heart condition. What struck the gathered prospectors as curious was Hatfield's apparent lack of interest in their mining camp. Despite their enthusiastic descriptions of Crescent's potential, he remained politely indifferent. By sunrise the next morning, he had broken camp and was headed toward Searchlight. 2 days later, fate would have our witness cross paths with Hatfield again, this time in Searchlight at Jack Wheatley's boarding house. It was here, over a post-dinner smoke on the porch, that the story began to take an extraordinary turn. During their conversation, Hatfield revealed he had placer gold to sell. Our witness directed him to the assay office at either the Duplex or Quartet mine. Later that afternoon, Hatfield returned with something remarkable, 5 or 6 gold nuggets of such extraordinary beauty that they left an indelible impression on all who saw them. These weren't ordinary specimens. They were the kind of nuggets that make prospectors' dreams seem possible. But the true heart of our story, the tale that would become legend, emerged the following day. Hatfield had completed his business in Searchlight, seeing both the doctor and purchasing his supplies. He invited our witness to accompany him back to Crescent, a journey of 14 miles west. It was during their midday break, with bacon sizzling over the fire and coffee brewing in the pot, that Hatfield shared his incredible discovery: 4 pounds of gold nuggets found in a black sand deposit near the Clark Mountains, northeast of what was then called Nipano, now known as Nipton. The story began with Hatfield camped below Clark Peak. One day, while exploring the mountainside, he witnessed a remarkable mirage to the east, a dry lake bed that suddenly appeared to fill with water, complete with trees along its shores that seemed to reflect in the phantom waters. Being an experienced desert traveler, Hatfield had brought ample water supplies, allowing him to investigate this curious sight. As the mirage dissipated upon approach, Hatfield made a discovery that would prove far more valuable than any desert illusion. On the eastern side of a small limestone hill, approximately 50 feet above the dry lake bed, he found the entrance to a cave. Now, caves have always held a special fascination for humans. They might contain anything, from iron-bound chests filled with precious treasures to artifacts of long-lost civilizations, from bandit loot to the bones of extinct creatures. This primal attraction to caves, perhaps inherited from our ancient ancestors who sought shelter from prehistoric dangers, drew Hatfield to explore further. The entrance was a long tunnel, and as he ventured deeper, he heard something unexpected: the sound of running water. Returning to the entrance for his lantern, he pressed on, eventually emerging into a sight that defied imagination: a great dome-shaped chamber resembling an amphitheater filled with churning water. What happened next was extraordinary. As Hatfield watched, a small whirlpool appeared in the center of the pool, and suddenly, with a thunderous roar, the water drained away. The cave's floor was revealed to be shaped like an enormous basin, with bench-like terraces stepping down to a dark center. These terraces were laden with black sand that trickled down with the receding water. The cave itself was a natural wonder. Thousands of stalactites hung from the ceiling like stone icicles, while stalagmites reached upward from the floor. In places, these formations met to create massive columns. The walls were adorned with lime carbonate that sparkled like diamond-studded tapestries, and numerous grottos sparkled with crystals. But the cave held more than just natural beauty. Above the top terrace lay a human skeleton, and nearby, in one of the grottos, rested the bones of what Hatfield believed to be an extinct ground sloth, silent testimonies to the cave's ancient history. The most remarkable aspect of this cave was its apparent connection to the Pacific Ocean. According to Hatfield, the cave's water level rose and fell with the ocean's tides, creating a spectacular show every 12 hours. The process began with a rumbling sound like distant underground cannons, followed by an amazing display. A dark column of water and sand, 18 feet in diameter, would surge upward, reaching heights of 45 to 50 feet. This dome of water and sand would spread out into waves, breaking into white spray as it crashed against the terraces. This intense agitation would continue for several hours before settling into mill-pond stillness, only to begin again with the next tide. The black sand that came with each tidal surge was the source of Hatfield's gold. He had gathered just a few handfuls of this sand, finding it sprinkled with yellow nuggets that gleamed in the desert sunlight. The potential wealth was staggering. Hatfield claimed there was between 3 to 6 feet of this heavy black sand on the dry lake bed, now hidden beneath a shroud of snow-white sand. But like many tales of lost treasure, this story takes a tragic turn. Hatfield promised to return in 3 weeks, after our witness had sold his mining claims to an old French-Canadian named Joe Simonek, who was prospecting for Dr. John Horsky of Helena, Montana. But Hatfield never returned. Later reports spoke of a grim discovery: an elderly man with white whiskers found dead on the dry lake bed near Ivanpah, alongside his murdered burros. Whether this was Hatfield remains a mystery, another question mark in this remarkable tale. Today, the lost cave of golden sand remains one of the Southwest's most tantalizing mysteries. Somewhere between the Clark Mountains and Ivanpah, perhaps hidden beneath the desert's shifting sands, there might still exist a cave where Pacific tides deliver golden treasures twice daily. The story suggests that someone with the right equipment could live like a king by harvesting the cave's endless bounty. They would find themselves in a fairy palace, waiting only for the tide to bring in more gold. Is it real? Did Riley Hatfield truly discover a cave where ocean tides delivered golden wealth through some mysterious underground connection? Or is it simply another desert tale, born in the heat and isolation of the Southwest? We may never know. What we do know is that somewhere in the vast expanse of the Nevada desert, beneath the white sands of a dry lake bed, there might be a cave waiting to be rediscovered. A cave where water still rises and falls with the distant ocean tides, where black sand still holds its golden secrets, and where the bones of ancient creatures keep their silent vigil in crystal-lined grottos. Until someone finds it, if indeed it exists, the Cave of Golden Sands remains one of the many mysteries of the American Southwest, a tale that reminds us that sometimes the most incredible stories are the ones that might just be true. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where we uncover the most fascinating forgotten tales of the American Southwest. Today, we're diving into an extraordinary story that begins where many great quests of the American Southwest started, with the Spanish search for gold. But unlike the well-known tales of Coronado and his fellow conquistadors, today's story takes us down a different path, following the remarkable journey of an unlikely Spanish noble, an Irishman named Patrick O'Donoghue. Somewhere beneath the shifting sands of the Arizona desert lies one of history's most intriguing mysteries. Hidden from human eyes for almost 2 centuries, an entire Spanish mission slumbers beneath the arid wastes of the Altar Desert, along with the remains of what was once one of the most magnificent haciendas in all of the Southwest. This isn't just any lost settlement. We're talking about a mission adorned with gold, decorated with precious stones, and home to bells whose rings were said to sound like angels' voices. But before we delve into the mystery of its disappearance, let's explore how this remarkable place came to exist at all. It's a tale that takes us back to the latter half of the 18th century, when Spain's influence in the New World was beginning to wane. The Spanish crown had a problem. After years of plundering Mexico's wealth, the royal coffers were running dangerously low. The gold chests of Mexico, once overflowing with riches, were now scraping bottom. Spain needed a new source of wealth, and they needed it quickly. In response, the crown issued a sovereign decree, establishing the village of Loreto in Mexico as a base of operations for gold exploration. Enter Patrick O'Donoghue, an Irish warrior whose story seems almost too colorful to be true. Yet, historical records confirm this remarkable man's existence and his incredible journey from Irish soldier to Spanish nobleman. O'Donoghue had earned his reputation on the battlefields of Europe, fighting so effectively against the English that he caught the attention of the King of Spain himself. But this wasn't O'Donoghue's first encounter with the New World. Before his elevation to Spanish nobility, he had served as a commandant on one of the most dangerous frontiers in the Americas, a region where the Apache's arrows made every day a fight for survival. His service was so distinguished that the King of Spain recalled him to court and bestowed upon him an extraordinary honor, adoption into Spanish nobility. In a ceremony that must have been quite a sight, an Irish warrior being embraced by Spanish royalty, Patrick O'Donoghue became Don Padraig O'Donoghue. But the king's generosity didn't stop there. Along with his new name came a grant of 12 leagues of land in an area known as Papagueria, what we now know as northern Sonora, Mexico, and the southwestern portion of Arizona. When Don Padraig arrived at the Spanish outpost of Laredo to claim his grant, he couldn't have known that fate had more in store for him. The commander of the local garrison was struggling with the crown's demands for gold exploration. When word reached him that Don Padraig was in the village, he saw an opportunity. After all, who better to lead an expedition into dangerous territory than a man whose own land grant lay in the heart of it? That night, in the commander's quarters, a bargain was struck. Don Padraig would lead an expedition into Papagueria, and in return, he would receive provisions and support to develop his grant, if he found it suitable for occupation. It was a gamble for both parties, but one that would lead to one of the most remarkable settlements in Southwest history. The expedition set out along the infamous Camino del Diablo, the Devil's Highway. This wasn't just any trail. It was a brutal path that tested the limits of human endurance. They traversed broken-backed mountains, descended into dark canyons, and finally reached Don Podrick's grant. 60,000 acres of what appeared to be nothing but sand, cactus, and danger. One of Don Podrick's lieutenants, surveying the harsh landscape, called out what everyone else was thinking. Only a madman would remain here. He urged O'Donoghue to return to Laredo and sell the grant to some power-hungry magistrate. But O'Donoghue saw something in this desolate landscape that others missed. "This is a land of solitude," he declared, "and solitude is something I have always desired." He named his grant the Garden of Solitude, and against all advice, decided to stay. With just a handful of servants, basic provisions, a sack of beans, some cheese, and a barrel of wine, Don Podrick began the seemingly impossible task of creating a paradise in the desert. As his companions rode away, he shouted after them, "Ho amigos, do not forget to return this way and you will find my garden in bloom." What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. Using sun-dried bricks, Don Podrick constructed a hacienda that would have looked at home in the finest districts of Madrid. The courtyard was worthy of Spanish nobility, and soon, through careful diplomacy and generous gifts, the hacienda became a gathering place for local Papago Native Americans. The Papago didn't come empty-handed. They brought gifts of gold from secret mines, and with each offering, the hacienda grew more magnificent. But Don Podrick wasn't content with just physical beauty. He sent to Spain for his lady, and upon her arrival, the Garden of Solitude truly began to live up to its creator's vision. As word of Don Podrick's success spread south to Mexico, Franciscan fathers approached him with a request, permission to establish a mission on his grant. The result was the Mission de los Cuatro Evangelistas, the mission of the four evangelists, which would become one of the most opulent religious structures ever built in the West. The mission was a testament to the wealth that flowed through the Garden of Solitude. According to legend, its squat dome and ceiling were lined with sheets of gold mined by the Native Americans. Don Podrick himself contributed an altar set of solid gold and adorned the statue of the Virgin with a string of green pearls. But perhaps most remarkable were the mission's bells, cast in a European foundry and blessed with tones so pure they were said to sound like angels' voices. Life in the Garden of Solitude fell into a peaceful rhythm, marked by the celestial ringing of these bells. They called the community to meals, to prayers, to celebration and reflection. Don Podrick, his señora, their family, and the Papago Native Americans lived in a harmony that seemed almost too perfect to last. And indeed, it was. In 1780, the shadow of violence fell across the Garden of Solitude. The Apache natives, long enemies of both the Spanish and the Papago, had declared a war of extermination. One night, they descended upon the hacienda and mission. In a cruel twist of fate, the same patio where Don Podrick had hosted countless joyous fiestas became the site of unspeakable tragedy. The Apache gathered the entire colony there, and in one night of violence, erased years of peace and prosperity. Nothing survived. What couldn't be destroyed by force was consumed by flame. The Garden of Solitude, that improbable paradise in the desert, was reduced to ashes and ruins. Time and nature conspired to hide the evidence of this tragedy. The desert winds blew sand over the ruins, desert plants took root, and gradually the Garden of Solitude disappeared beneath a cloak of earth and vegetation. For nearly 2 centuries, the location of Don Podrick's dream remained a mystery. The story might have remained forever buried if not for a chance discovery at the University of Arizona. A research worker, translating old Spanish documents, uncovered the incomplete story of Don Padrick and the mission of the four evangelists. This discovery led to an intriguing encounter with an old prospector who claimed to have stumbled upon something remarkable in the desert. 10 years earlier, this prospector and his pack mule had been crossing the Altar Desert when he tripped over something unusual, a charred beam protruding from the sand. Curious, he began digging and soon uncovered the top of an old bell covered in Latin letters. All he could make out was the name Philip and some Roman numerals. Thinking he might return later, he carefully mapped the location. When the researcher heard this story, he knew he had found someone who might have actually stood above the lost mission and its legendary wealth. Together, they ventured into the desert with the prospector's map. But the desert is a master of deception. Sandstorms can transform landmarks overnight, and despite months of searching, they never found the site again. Since then, countless treasure seekers have ventured into the Altar Desert, hoping to uncover the lost mission and its legendary wealth. Each expedition has ended in failure. The ruins of the Mission de los Cuatro Evangelistas, the hacienda of Don Padrick, and their reputed riches remain hidden beneath the sands, waiting for the day when some fortunate soul might once again stumble upon a charred beam or a bell with Latin inscriptions. The story of Patrick O'Donoghue, the Irish warrior who became a Spanish Don, who dared to dream of paradise in the desert, remains one of Arizona's most captivating mysteries. His Garden of Solitude, though lost to time and tragedy, continues to capture the imagination of historians and treasure hunters alike. Perhaps somewhere beneath the shifting sands of the Altar Desert, the angel's bells still wait to ring again. This has been Southwest Desert. Join us next time for another remarkable tale from the American Southwest. When you travel through the American Southwest, every mountain range you encounter seems to hold its own whispered legend of lost gold. These tales often follow a familiar pattern. The longer the prospector's beard and the wilder the Native Americans, the richer the supposed mine. But today's story breaks that mold in fascinating ways. While our prospector certainly had his share of impressive whiskers, this thoroughly documented account stands apart from typical lost mine folklore. We're taking you to San Bernardino County, California, where a 1950s act of Congress had sparked renewed interest in a decades-old mystery. By reducing the boundaries of Joshua Tree National Monument, they reopened an area that might hold one of the Southwest's most intriguing lost mines. This is the story of Hermit John's lost ledge in the Sheephole Mountains. But before we dive into the mystery itself, let's set the scene. Picture yourself at the Amboy Railroad Station, a small desert outpost along the Santa Fe line. It's early summer morning, about 1901, and the desert air is already beginning to shimmer with heat. On the depot platform stands a gathering of the town's most reliable witnesses. Pete Ring, a local miner who knows these parts better than most; John Locke, who runs the local store; Jim Walsh, the section foreman who keeps the railroad running; Bill Pine, the Santa Fe station agent; and our story's witness, whose account preserves these extraordinary events. As they stand there on that fateful morning, something unusual catches their attention out across the vast, dry lake bed northeast of the station. The morning heat has created a perfect mirage, lifting everything into the air like some desert sorcery. Even Pete Ring's mine, sitting on its small brown hill near the eastern edge of the lake, appears to float in the sky, surrounded by what our witness describes as fairy palaces. Through this spectacular natural illusion, strange objects begin bobbing up and down on top of the heat waves. The men watch, transfixed, as these mysterious shapes dance through the morning air. That's when Pete Ring, with the casual familiarity of a desert veteran, breaks the silence. "Hell, That's Hermit John and his outfit. Now, this wasn't the first time the mysterious hermit had appeared at their little desert station. This would mark his third visit, and while he kept mostly to himself, he'd become something of a known figure around Amboy. The sight of him was memorable enough. Picture a man so tall that even while riding a large mule, his feet nearly dragged in the desert sand. The morning's mirage had made him appear even taller as he crossed the dry lake bed, like some mythical figure emerging from the desert haze. What happened next would transform a routine morning into desert legend. The hermit began unloading his cargo onto the depot platform, 6 sacks of ore, but fate had a way of intervening that day. Bill Pine, the station agent, noticed one of the sacks was badly torn and couldn't be accepted for shipment. This simple observation would lead to a revelation that would leave everyone present speechless. When the hermit emptied that torn sack onto the depot platform to transfer its contents, time seemed to stand still. There, scattered across the wooden planks, lay something extraordinary, chunks of light gray, iron-stained quartz. But this wasn't ordinary ore. No, this material was literally plastered and matted together with bright yellow gold. The sight was so spectacular that it nearly caused a stampede among the witnesses. Pete Ring's reaction captured the magnitude of the moment perfectly. "Jumping John D. Rockefeller," he exclaimed. "That's the richest ore that ever came out of the California desert." This wasn't just hyperbole from an excitable prospector. These men knew their minerals. At that very time, the Armenian miners at Virginia Dale were bringing in some impressive gold specimens of their own. But even their richest finds paled in comparison to what lay before them on the platform that morning. The hermit, clearly uncomfortable with the attention his ore was drawing, quickly gathered up the precious material and transferred it to a new sack. He weighed it carefully and had Agent Pine bill it to a San Francisco smelter. His actions spoke of someone who knew exactly what he had and was determined to keep its source secret. After the excitement died down, the old prospector led his 5 burros and saddle mule to the tank car on the Santa Fe tracks. The animals drank their fill, and then the hermit made camp just behind the little grocery store near the railroad tracks. The locals were burning with curiosity, but desert etiquette prevailed. In those days, asking too many questions about a man's business, especially when he wore a 6-shooter, wasn't considered wise. But here's where our story takes an unexpected turn. That evening, our witness decided to pay a visit to the old prospector's campfire. What he found challenges the typical image of the gruff desert prospector. There sat the mysterious hermit, reading aloud from the Psalms of David, his voice carrying across the desert night as he recited from a large, leather-covered Bible he carried in his pack. Perhaps it was their shared Kentucky roots that got him talking, or maybe it was the snake medicine our witness happened to have in his hip pocket. Whatever the reason, the hermit began to share his story. He was worried, he admitted, because the others had seen his rich ore. He feared they would try to follow him back to his mine. What he revealed next reads like something from a Spanish colonial history book. While prospecting in the Sheephole Mountains, specifically in the area northeast of Dale Dry Lake and southwest of Cadiz Dry Lake, he'd stumbled upon something remarkable, an ancient Spanish or Mexican mine. The site bore all the hallmarks of colonial mining operations. A primitive ore-crushing mill still stood nearby, evidence that the precious metal had been processed right there on site. The location told a story of hardship and possible tragedy. A caved-in shaft near the Arastra might have once served as a well crucial for any mining operation in such arid territory. More ominously, 2 or 3 weathered graves spoke of those who never left the site. Mining tools, centuries old, lay scattered about, silent witnesses to operations from a bygone era. The hermit described the deposit in almost reverential terms. The ore was enormously rich, he said, with enough visible gold to fulfill his wildest dreams of wealth. He mentioned prospecting around a large iron ore outcropping to the north of his find, though that proved too low grade to be worth his time. His description would place the mine either in what was then the northeast corner of Joshua Tree National Monument or just across the line to the west. The next morning brought another piece to the puzzle. As the Santa Fe passenger train pulled into the station, the hermit was observed dropping a letter in the mail car's slot. He spent one more day in Amboy, watering his animals and filling his water kegs. Then, following one of the Armenian freight wagons, he headed out of town. That was the last anyone ever saw of Hermit John. He never appeared at Virginia Dale or any other railroad station along the Santa Fe line again. The letter he mailed, presumably instructions to the smelter about where to send his payment, became just another thread in this desert mystery. Some speculate he met the fate that has claimed so many others in the harsh desert Southwest, his bones perhaps lying beneath the shifting sands. Others wonder if he simply took his wealth and disappeared to live out his days in comfort somewhere far from the desert's burning gaze. The original Spanish or Mexican miners left their own mysteries behind, if they were indeed killed by bandits or Indians. As some of the evidence suggests, they might have left treasure buried around the small rock house, the ruins of which our witness claimed still stood at the time of this account. Today, the Sheephole Mountains still guard their secrets beneath the relentless California sun. Somewhere among those weathered peaks, an old arastra might still sit near a caved-in shaft, marking the spot where Hermit John found his fortune. And now, with the reduction of the Joshua Tree National Monument boundaries, prospectors once again had the chance to search for this legendary lost ledge. What sets this story apart from so many lost mine legends is the credibility of its witnesses and the physical evidence they observed. This wasn't a tale told second or third hand around a campfire. These were respected members of the community who saw the incredibly rich ore with their own eyes. The story doesn't rely on wild Native Americans or mysterious curses, just documented events and a puzzle that still waits to be solved. Somewhere out there, among the sun-baked rocks and shifting sands of the Sheephole Mountains, lies the answer to this mystery. Whether it's Hermit John's lost ledge, the remains of the Spanish mining operation, or perhaps both, the truth waits for someone bold enough or lucky enough to find it. The only question is, will it be found in our lifetime, or will it continue to be one of the great mysteries of the American Southwest? Welcome to Southwest Desert, where today we're diving deep into one of the most compelling and well-documented lost treasure stories ever to emerge from Arizona's rugged borderlands. Unlike many tales of lost riches that turn out to be nothing more than campfire fantasies, this story of the Chiricahua Mountains treasure isn't just another old-timer spinning yarns. This is a tale of authentic, twice-stolen plunder from Old Mexico, a fortune that carved a bloody path across hundreds of miles of empty deserts and barren mountains. Before we delve into this remarkable story, let's talk about what we're actually looking for. Thanks to a dying bandit's confession, we have a detailed inventory of this magnificent treasure. Picture this, a simple cigar box, but one filled with diamonds worth $1 million, stolen from a bank vault in Monterrey, Mexico. Alongside it, 39 bars of gold bullion valued at $600,000 and scores of silver ingots cast in Mexico. There were 90,000 Mexican gold dollars and countless sacks of gold and silver coins. But perhaps most intriguing and hardest to believe were two life-size statues of pure gold, one depicting the Savior and the other the Virgin Mary, both allegedly taken from the sanctuary niches of a great Mexican cathedral. Our story begins in 1881, in a place that time has almost completely erased, Galeyville, situated along East Turkey Creek in the heart of the Chiricahua Mountains of Arizona. If you visited the site today, you'd find nothing but peaceful white-faced Hereford cattle grazing in lush summer grass. But in 1881, Galeyville was anything but peaceful. It served as the notorious hangout for Tombstone's most dangerous outlaws, and probably never before or since has such a deadly collection of humanity gathered in one place. Picture the scene: hold-up men, gunfighters, rustlers, crooked gamblers, and cutthroats, all gathered in this remote mountain town. But even among this rogues' gallery, two men stood out as the unofficial rulers of this robber's roost: Curly Bill Brocius and his lieutenant, the darkly handsome John Ringo. While Curly Bill's primary business was cattle rustling, commanding a private army of somewhere between 40 to 100 bully boys, he had numerous creative ways of acquiring wealth without honest work. His favorite method: waylaying Mexican smugglers en route to Tucson. In July of 1881, Curly Bill and his gang had already pulled off their biggest heist yet, a bloody ambush at a place called Devil's Kitchen in Skeleton Canyon, near the New Mexico line. They walked away with $75,000 in silver, taken from the dead bodies of slaughtered mules and hapless Mexicans. In a display of typical outlaw excess, they managed to spend every cent of it in just 4 weeks, drinking and gambling in Galeyville's saloons. But fate was about to present an even greater opportunity. Word filtered across the border through Curly Bill's intelligence network that another group of Mexican smugglers was planning to move a cargo far more valuable than anything they'd handled before. Curly Bill's eyes must have gleamed at the news, and he immediately dispatched his trusted man, Jim Hughes, to Sonora to gather more information. Hughes was the perfect man for the job. Half Mexican himself, he spoke Spanish like a native and played his part brilliantly. He ingratiated himself with the locals by condemning everything gringo, from the Constitution to Curly Bill himself. The Mexicans, impressed by his apparent sympathy for their cause, welcomed him with open arms and flowing tequila. In their cups they revealed their plans. They would follow almost the exact same route as the previous unfortunate group, right through Skeleton Canyon and the San Simon Valley in August. Bursting with this golden information, Hughes rushed back to Galeyville to report to Curly Bill. But here's where fate threw its first curveball. Curly Bill was nowhere to be found, and nobody knew when he'd return. With time running out, Hughes made a fateful decision that would set in motion a chain of betrayals. He decided to double-cross his own boss and do the job himself. Hughes quickly assembled his team. He recruited Zwing Hunt, a mule skinner with ambitions of greater things, and Billy Grounds, a fresh-faced 19-year-old eager to make his mark in the outlaw world. 5 other prominent citizens of Galeyville rounded out the crew. After swearing them all to secrecy, they rode out one starry August night, heading southeast across San Simon Valley toward Skeleton Canyon. The next morning, their prey arrived: 15 Mexican smugglers with twice as many mules, carrying what might have been the richest cargo ever to cross the international line. The smugglers weren't foolish. They'd learned from the fate of their predecessors. Their black eyes constantly scanned the cliffs as they passed through the Devil's Kitchen, their guns cocked and ready. But nature conspired against them. Everything seemed peaceful. Birds sang, the stream rippled in the sun, and a light breeze whispered through the treetops. Near the canyon's entrance, the smugglers decided to stop for a meal of tortillas and frioles, planning a short siesta before tackling the long, hot trek through San Simon Valley. They posted guards up and down the canyon, then stretched out comfortably on the grass beneath a big oak tree. The peaceful scene exploded into chaos. Rifle fire erupted from the rocky walls above, and the quiet canyon transformed into a chamber of echoing death. 3 Mexicans died instantly. Panic seized the survivors, and the camp erupted into a wildly confused scramble of shouting, running men, rearing horses and stampeding mules. The surviving smugglers leaped onto their ponies and galloped down the canyon, bullets whistling after them. 3 more fell as they fled. The heavily laden mules, terrified by the gunfire, scattered in all directions. The bandits pursued them relentlessly, determined not to let a single animal escape with its valuable cargo. Some say 1 mule got away, but if it did, its fate remains a mystery lost to time. During the firefight, fate struck again. Zwing Hunt took a smuggler's bullet. Young Billy Grounds bound the wound with his own undershirt, but this injury would later prove crucial to our story. When they rejoined their companions, the bandits faced an unexpected problem: what to do with their massive haul. Dead mules lay scattered throughout the canyon and far into the valley. Without pack animals or wagons, they couldn't move their prize. The bandits decided to temporarily cache the treasure at the canyon's mouth. 2 men began digging a hole beneath 3 oak trees while their companions rifled through the dead mules' aparejos, laboriously carrying the bars of gold and silver and sacks of coins to the hiding place. It is not clear where they found picks and shovels or how 2 men managed to dig a hole several yards long and 7 feet deep in just one afternoon. But what we do know is that for many years afterward, gold and silver coins and the bleaching bones of men and mules lined the canyon from its entrance to the Devil's Kitchen. Cowboys from neighboring ranches would later find human skulls, using them for soap dishes and ashtrays. A grim reminder of that bloody day. Jim Hughes, having orchestrated the raid without Curly Bill's knowledge, had to return to Galeyville and pretend nothing had happened. He entrusted the task of moving the treasure to Zwing Hunt and Billy Grounds. Several days later, they completed this task using a 4-horse wagon driven by a Mexican teamster. After burying the treasure in a remote location, they ensured their secret would be kept. They killed the teamster, shot the horses, and burned the wagon as a makeshift funeral pyre. Hughes waited in Galeyville for their report, but it never came. Just days later, Hunt and Grounds had a fatal encounter with other outlaws at the Stockton Ranch. Young Billy Grounds' promising career in banditry ended in a flash, while Hunt was badly wounded and taken to the Tombstone Hospital. When Hughes came to visit, Hunt escaped through a rear window, demonstrating that those who live by double cross often fall victim to it themselves. For a time, everyone believed Hunt had been killed by Apaches. There was even a fresh grave to prove it. But this too was a deception, likely meant to throw Jim Hughes off the trail. Months later, Hunt appeared very much alive in his hometown of San Antonio, Texas. However, his wound had developed gangrene, and the doctors gave him a death sentence. In his final hours, he called his uncle to his bedside and revealed the whole story, even drawing a map to the treasure's location. According to Hunt's deathbed revelation, the treasure lies at the foot of Davis Mountain, from whose summit you can see into New Mexico. A canyon curves 1.5 miles to the west, hemmed in by wooded hills on one side and a sheer rock precipice on the other. Through this canyon flows a stream that cascades over a ledge in a 10-foot waterfall, the same waterfall where Hunt and Grounds bathed after burying their ill-gotten gains. He described 2 springs about 1.25 miles apart, Silver Spring and Gum Spring, and marked the treasure's location with precise instructions. Between the springs, but slightly closer to Silver Spring, stands a square-sided stone, 3 feet high and 1 foot thick. On its east face, Hunt chiseled 2 crosses, one above the other. 20 paces east of that stone, he said, lies the buried treasure of the Chiricahuas. But here's the cruel twist that has frustrated treasure hunters for over 70 years. Hunt never revealed where Davis Mountain was. He'd named it himself, after a friend he and Grounds had buried nearby. In the vast expanse of the Southwest, there are at least 200 mountains from which you can see into New Mexico, dozens of curving canyons, and countless springs roughly 1 mile apart. The search began immediately. Hunt's uncle was the first to try. His brother spent 30 years combing the hills without success. Bill Sanders, who owned a ranch on West Turkey Creek, believed Hunt had confused the names and actually meant Harris Mountain, about 6 miles northwest of Portal. The location seems to fit many of Hunt's descriptions. You can see into New Mexico from its summit, there's a grave at its foot, and East Turkey Creek Canyon curves nearby. Even a burned wagon was found in the vicinity. But there are problems with this theory. The grave contains the remains of a man named Harris, his wife and child, all killed by Apaches, not Hunt's friend Davis. There's no ledge in the canyon to create a 10-foot waterfall, and no one has found either Silver Spring or Gum Spring, let alone the marked stone. Yet the search continues to this day. Year after year, hundreds of tons of Arizona soil are turned over by hopeful treasure hunters, each believing they'll be the one to finally uncover the lost treasure of the Chiricahuas. Somewhere out there, beneath the southwestern sun, a fortune in gold, silver, and diamonds still waits to be found, if you can solve the mystery that Zwing Hunt took to his grave. Thank you for joining the Southwest Desert. Until next time, keep exploring the mysteries of our past. I hope you enjoyed these Southwest Desert adventures. If you would like to help support my channel and time, hit the super thanks heart icon on the bottom of the video and contribute. This is very helpful. Happy trails.